What is it like to be born into a myth? To grow up in a world where your father is not just a man but a global icon, a king, a figure of almost religious devotion? And how do you find your own voice, your own life, your own self, when you are living in the shadow of such a monumental legacy? Lisa Marie Presley's life was a story of extraordinary, almost surreal privilege and of almost unimaginable pain. For decades, the world has watched her, speculated about her, and tried to tell her story for her. Now, for the first time, we get to hear it in her own words. Her posthumous memoir, From Here to the Great Unknown, completed by her daughter, the actress Keough, is not the celebrity tell-all you might expect. It is a raw, vulnerable, heartbreaking, and deeply philosophical journey into the heart of an American dynasty. It is a story about the long shadow of fame, the crushing, relentless weight of grief, and the eternal human search for a place of peace and a self you can call your own. To understand the story of Lisa Marie, you must begin in the strange and often lonely kingdom of Graceland. She was the only child of Elvis Presley, the undisputed king of rock and roll, and her childhood was unlike any other on earth. Graceland, the famous Memphis mansion, was not just a home, it was a bubble, a private nocturnal world designed to shield Elvis from the pressures of his own unimaginable fame. Lisa Marie describes a childhood of incredible love and indulgence from her father. He would shower her with gifts, fly her to his concerts on his private jet, the Lisa Marie. She was, in every sense, his princess, but it was also a world of profound isolation and strangeness. She was a little girl growing up in a house full of adults, a place where day was night and night was day, a place cut off from the normal rhythms of the world. And at the center of it all was her loving but deeply troubled father. She was a witness to his escalating prescription drug abuse, a problem that the circle of enablers around him refused to confront. And then, when she was just 9 years old, her entire world collapsed. On August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley died at Graceland. For the world, it was the death of a king. For Lisa Marie, it was the death of her dad. And this single catastrophic event would become the foundational trauma of her life. The great before and after that would shape everything that was to come. She was no longer just a little girl. She was the daughter of a legend, the keeper of a sacred flame, a public symbol of a global outpouring of grief. And she was only 9 years old. The years that followed were a long and difficult search for some semblance of normalcy, for some sense of a self that was separate from the giant mythic shadow of her father. From Here to the Great Unknown is an unflinchingly honest account of that search. Her teenage years were a struggle, marked by a rebellious spirit and a battle with drugs, a way of acting out the immense unprocessed grief she was carrying. And her romantic life was a constant source of public fascination and private turmoil. She writes with a raw candor about her 4 marriages, particularly her 2 most high-profile ones. Her marriage to the king of pop, Michael Jackson, is portrayed not as a cynical publicity stunt, as the media at the time often suggested, but as a genuine if deeply strange and ultimately doomed connection between 2 people who were, in their own ways, the only 2 people on the planet who could understand the bizarre reality of their own lives. They were both prisoners of an almost unimaginable level of childhood fame. Her marriage to the actor Nicolas Cage was another intense and volatile relationship, a connection between 2 powerful and artistic personalities. Through these stories we see a woman who is not just chasing celebrity, but who is desperately searching for a partner who can see and understand the real person behind the famous name. A crucial part of her search for her own identity was her own music career. For years she worked to become a singer and a songwriter in her own right. It was a courageous act, an attempt to step into the same arena as her legendary father, and to prove that she had her own voice, her own story to tell. Her music was often dark, raw, and deeply personal, a world away from the rock and roll anthems of her dad. It was her attempt to forge an identity that was hers, and hers alone. The unspeakable grief, losing a son. The central and most devastating theme of the latter part of the book is grief. Lisa Marie's life was bookended by 2 catastrophic losses. The first was the loss of her father. The second, and the one that she describes as the event that completely and utterly destroyed her, was the death of her son, Benjamin Keough. In 2020, her beloved son, a talented musician who bore a striking resemblance to his famous grandfather, died by suicide at the age of 27. This is the great unknown of the book's title, the abyss of grief from which she would never truly emerge. The book is an unflinching and almost unbearably raw, look at a parent's ultimate nightmare. She writes with a brutal honesty about the all-consuming nature of this new grief, a grief that dwarfed everything that had come before it. She talks about the guilt, the what-ifs, the desperate search for answers in the aftermath of a suicide. She became a fierce advocate for other grieving parents, trying to find a language for a kind of pain that is almost impossible to articulate. It was in the depths of this terrible grief that she began to work on this memoir in earnest. She started recording hours and hours of audio tapes, telling her story, trying to make sense of her own life, perhaps as a way of keeping the memory of her son alive and of leaving a legacy for her own daughters. But she would not live to finish it. A Daughter's Promise, the making of the book. In January of 2023, Lisa Marie Presley died suddenly at the age of 54. Her story, it seemed, would be left unfinished. But this is where the book's unique and beautiful structure comes into play. After her mother's death, her daughter, the actress Keough, was faced with a choice. What was she to do with these raw, powerful, and unfinished tapes? She made a courageous and loving decision. She decided to finish her mother's work. From Here to the Great Unknown is not a traditional memoir. It is a conversation between a mother and a daughter, a conversation that takes place across the veil of death. Riley listened to the hundreds of hours of her mother's tapes, and she began to weave her own memories, her own perspective, and her own love into the narrative. The book is structured around Lisa Marie's voice, her stories, her raw and unfiltered memories. But Riley acts as the gentle and loving guide. She provides the context. She fills in the gaps. She tells the stories that her mother couldn't. And in doing so, she creates a work that is both a powerful autobiography of her mother and a deeply moving tribute from a daughter. It is an incredible act of love, a daughter's promise to ensure that her mother's true story, in her own voice, would finally be heard. The philosophy of a survivor. So what is the ultimate philosophy of Lisa Marie Presley's life? Her story, for all its fame, wealth, and tragedy, is at its core a story of incredible and relentless resilience. It is a story about the search for an authentic and stable sense of self in a world that was anything but stable. She was a woman who was born into a story that was already written for her. She was the king's daughter, and she spent her entire life trying to write her own chapters, to find her own voice, to be seen as her own person. Her life was a constant battle against the crushing weight of grief. The loss of her father and then, unimaginably, the loss of her son were the defining events of her existence. And her story is an unflinching look at the lifelong work of trying to survive that kind of pain. And yet, it is not a story of victimhood. It is a story of a survivor. It is the story of a woman who, despite everything, never lost her fierce, rebellious, and deeply loving spirit. The final, powerful message of From Here to the Great Unknown is a testament to the unbreakable bond between a mother and her children. It is a story that finds a strange and heartbreaking kind of grace in the midst of tragedy. It is a reminder that even when a life is cut short, the story of that life, and the love within it, can be made immortal. It is a deep inquiry into the nature of legacy, of memory, and of a love that transcends even the great unknown. If you believe that the most powerful stories are the ones that are told with a raw, unflinching, and courageous honesty, then you are in the right place. Welcome to Geeky Philosopher. Subscribe, and let's continue to explore the profound stories that reveal the true nature of the human experience.